I've always loved the quiet. Maybe that's why I used to camp alone so much. I work in tech support. 8 hours a day of ringing phones, angry customers, and the hum of office machines. So when the weekend came, I'd pack up my little tent, drive out to the national forest 2 hours north, and spend a couple nights under the stars. It was my reset button. My peace. This trip started like all the others. A Friday afternoon in late September. Leaves just starting to turn, air crisp but not too cold. I'd picked a secluded site I'd been to once before, just a small clearing near a shallow creek, maybe half a mile off the main trail. I'd be totally alone out there. That's what I wanted. The drive was long but peaceful. By the time I parked at the trailhead, the sun was sinking low behind the trees. I slung my pack over my shoulder, grabbed my flashlight, and hiked in. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of my boots and the occasional rustle of leaves. The deeper I went, the more the sounds of civilization faded. By the time I reached the clearing, I could almost feel the silence pressing against my skin. That stillness always made me smile. I set up camp, built a small fire, and cooked a can of chili. Nothing special, just simple and warm. When the last bit of daylight slipped away, I sat by the fire with my thermos of coffee, watching sparks drift into the darkness. I remember thinking how alive the woods seemed at night, the way the firelight danced on the trees, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant hoot of an owl. It was around 10 when I first heard it, a whisper. At first I thought it was the wind. It came softly like a faint breath brushing past my ear. But then I realized the air was still, completely still. The whisper came again, low, almost too quiet to hear, like someone speaking from far away. I froze. The sound came from somewhere behind me, near the tree line. I turned my head slowly, flashlight in hand, and scanned the dark woods. Nothing but shadows. I told myself it was just the wind again, or maybe my mind playing tricks. I'd been alone out there plenty of times before and knew how easy it was to get spooked. Still, the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. I added more wood to the fire and tried to shake it off. But every few minutes I'd hear that same soft whisper, always just faint enough that I couldn't make out words, but distinct enough that it didn't sound like an animal or the wind. Almost like someone trying not to be heard. Eventually I gave up on ignoring it. I grabbed my flashlight and did a slow circle around my campsite. My beam lit up the trees, the creek, the rocks. Nothing, not even footprints besides my own. I laughed nervously, trying to make it feel less eerie, and went back to my fire. That night I slept with my hatchet beside my sleeping bag. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside my tent. At first I thought it was a deer or raccoon. But then I heard the breathing, heavy, human. I lay perfectly still, heart pounding. Whoever, or whatever it was, stood just outside the thin fabric wall of my tent. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves shifting under their feet. Then that same whisper again, closer this time. Right outside the door, it wasn't words. Just a sound, like someone mumbling through clenched teeth. I sat up, trying not to make a sound, and slowly reached for my flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I flicked it on and aimed it at the tent flap. Nothing. Silence. Then, slowly, the shadow of a hand pressed against the tent wall. I froze. The fingers dragged down the fabric, slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I shouted, "Hey, get the hell out of here," and burst out of the tent, flashlight and hatchet in hand. The beam cut through the dark, but the clearing was empty. The woods were still again. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I circled the camp, heart hammering, but found no footprints, no sign of anyone. When I finally crawled back into the tent, I left the flashlight on and didn't close my eyes the rest of the night. By morning, everything felt wrong. The air was heavier somehow, like the forest itself was watching. The silence was too deep, too absolute. Even the birds seemed gone. I packed up my tent faster than I ever had before. I was ready to hike back out and forget the whole thing, chalk it up to exhaustion or an overactive imagination. That's when I found it. Right where I'd built my fire the night before, someone or something had arranged a small circle of rocks. Inside the circle was a pile of blackened pine needles like they'd been burned. And on top of the ash was a single thing, a pine cone split perfectly in half with something carved inside. It looked like an eye, tiny, but precise. Like it had been scratched in with a knife. I didn't stay to examine it. I kicked dirt over the whole thing, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started down the trail as fast as I could, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Every few minutes I'd hear soft footsteps behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, nothing was there. Once I swore I saw movement in the trees, a shape slipping between the pines, too tall and too still to be human. I started running. By the time I reached the car, I was drenched in sweat and shaking. I threw my gear in the trunk, slammed the doors, and peeled out of there. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I hit the main road. When I finally did, I saw someone standing just at the edge of the forest. A tall figure motionless, almost blending into the trees. Even from that distance, I could tell they were watching me. And I swear, right before the trees swallowed them, they raised a hand like they were waving. I didn't go camping again for months after that. When I finally did, it was with friends. But even then, the woods didn't feel the same. The peace I used to find there was gone, replaced with this gnawing unease. A few weeks ago, I decided to drive past that forest again, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. I didn't stop, just drove along the old dirt road until I reached the familiar turnoff. The trailhead sign was gone. In its place, someone had nailed a plank of wood to the tree. Carved into it was that same symbol. The eye, and beneath it, in shaky letters, were 3 words: "We see you." I never believed the stories about Lake Marin. It was one of those places small towns whisper about. A dark patch of water surrounded by pine and fog, said to swallow more than fish. People claimed it was haunted, cursed, whatever word you want to use. But to me it was just another lake, one that hadn't seen a tourist in decades. Perfect for peace and quiet. At least that's what I thought. I was 28 at the time, an amateur photographer trying to build a nature portfolio. My plan was simple. Spend 3 nights camping on the North Shore, get sunrise shots over the water and maybe some long exposure night sky photos. I'd found an old map showing a dirt trail that still led there, though most of it had been reclaimed by the forest. The first day went smoothly. I parked my car at a logging road gate, slung my gear over my shoulder, and hiked in. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the air felt thick. The path wound through endless trees before finally opening up to a clearing overlooking the lake. It was beautiful, still glassy water reflecting the sky like a mirror. But it was silent. No insects, no birds, no ripples on the surface. Just stillness, I remember saying out loud. Guess I got the whole place to myself. And my voice came back flat, swallowed by the emptiness. I set up camp near the shore, tent, small fire pit, tripod by the water. By the time the sun dipped, the fog was already rolling in, thick and low, curling like smoke over the lake. I sat by the fire, camera in hand, trying to capture the way the mist moved. That's when I noticed it, and then the faint sound of something across the lake. A splash. It wasn't a fish. It sounded too heavy, like someone had thrown a rock into the water. I looked up, scanning the far shore, but the fog had swallowed everything. Then another splash, closer this time. I waited. Nothing. Finally, I shook it off. Lakes make weird sounds all the time. Shifting ice, bubbles, fish jumping. I told myself that though the night air suddenly felt colder. At around midnight, I decided to crawl into my tent. The fog had thickened so much I could barely see the water anymore. I zipped up my sleeping bag and lay back, listening to the faint lap of waves against the shore. Then I heard it. A scream. It came faint but clear, from somewhere across the lake. High-pitched, ragged, human. My whole body went cold. It wasn't an animal. I know what coyotes and foxes sound like. This wasn't that. This was pure human terror. It came again, shorter this time, cut off halfway like someone had clamped a hand over their mouth. I sat there frozen, staring at the tent wall, trying to process what I'd heard. Should I help? Should I call out? But who the hell could be out there? I hadn't seen another soul all day. I unzipped the tent slowly and poked my head out. The fog was so thick I could barely see 5 feet. My flashlight beam hit the mist and came back white, useless. The only sound was the faint ripple of water. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. "Is someone out there?" Silence. And then from somewhere out on the water, not the far shore this time but closer, came a reply. "Help, me." It was barely above a whisper, wet and broken like someone gasping between words. I froze. The voice sounded wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, like someone repeating a sound rather than actually saying it. "Help." Me. This time it came from directly on the water. I could hear the gentle slosh of waves beneath it. My light caught faint ripples spreading toward shore. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. Whatever it was coming closer. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the lake. For a moment I saw nothing but fog. Then maybe 30 feet out I saw the faint outline of something floating, pale and still. At first I thought it was a log. But as the fog shifted, I realized it was shaped like a person. A face just beneath the water's surface, eyes open and unblinking, staring straight up. I couldn't move. The face slowly tilted, turning toward me. And then, I swear to God, and the mouth opened. The scream that came out wasn't human. It was like the sound of the lake itself howling through a hollow throat. The air around me vibrated with it. I ran. I grabbed my camera bag, my light, and bolted into the woods, stumbling over roots and rocks. The scream didn't stop. It echoed through the trees, chasing me. I didn't stop until I reached a ridge high above the water, lungs burning. The sound finally faded. The forest fell silent again, like nothing had ever happened. When dawn came, I crept back to my campsite. The fog had lifted, sunlight glinting off the lake like glass. Everything looked normal. My tent stood where I'd left it. My gear was fine. For a second, I almost believed I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then I noticed the shoreline. Something had come out of the water. The mud was covered in long, wet drag marks, like someone had crawled up from the lake and walked around the camp. I followed them with my eyes and saw where they circled my tent again and again, before disappearing back into the water. I packed up and left. No breakfast, no photos, nothing. I hiked all the way back to my car and didn't stop until I hit the main road. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Curiosity mixed with guilt. What if someone had really been out there, hurt, and I'd run away? So I did something stupid. I went to the local library and looked up old records about Lake Merin. I found a folder of newspaper clippings from the 1970s. Dozens of drownings. Most were marked unexplained. One headline read, 3 campers missing on Lake Merin, only tent found. The article mentioned strange sounds reported by nearby residents, screaming, splashing, and voices calling for help at night. The most recent report was from 1998. A fisherman claimed he saw a woman standing on the lake. Not by the shore, on the lake. Said she vanished when the fog rolled in. I slammed the file shut and left. I told myself I'd never go back. But nightmares have a way of bringing places back to you. For weeks I kept dreaming of the lake. Of fog creeping into my tent. Of something whispering my name from the water. Every time I woke up I could still smell the damp earth. Still hear that faint sloshing sound outside the canvas. Then one night, I woke to that sound again, but I wasn't at the lake. I was in my apartment miles away in bed and still. I heard it. The soft rhythmic slosh of water against shore. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the window. I pulled back the curtain and froze. There on the glass were wet handprints. 5 long fingers pressed against the inside, not outside. Inside. I stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest thing I could, my camera tripod. The room was dead silent except for the dripping sound like water falling onto the floor. Then from behind me I heard a whisper. Help me, I turned, nothing there. But my reflection in the window wasn't alone. Behind me in the glass I saw the pale face from the lake, smiling. The scream that came out of my mouth wasn't even human. I ran from the room and didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot in the street, shaking uncontrollably. I moved 2 weeks later. Sold nearly all my photography gear. Haven't been camping since. But last month a friend of mine, another photographer, told me he was planning to visit Lake Merin. Said he wanted to capture the fog shots I always talk about. I told him not to go. Practically begged him. He laughed it off. That was 10 days ago. Yesterday, the police found his car by the old logging road. Tent still packed, gear untouched. The only thing missing was him. And when the rescue team went out to search the lake, they found something floating near the north shore, a camera. Inside were 24 photos, all of fog, water, and mist. But the last one was of him, taken from behind, standing on the shore, looking at the water, and in the reflection of the lake behind him, a pale face just beneath the surface, smiling. I wasn't planning on camping that night. It just kind of happened. I was driving through the northern part of Montana, heading home from visiting my brother. It was late, past midnight, and I'd been on the road for nearly 10 hours. My eyes were starting to blur, and the endless dark stretch of highway had turned into a tunnel of exhaustion. When I saw the sign for a Forest Service road and a small campground symbol, I figured it was safer to pull off for a few hours of rest than risk dozing off behind the wheel. The dirt road snaked deep into the woods. No lights, no cars, no sign of life. When I finally reached the small clearing labeled Bear Creek Campground, I felt immediate relief. It wasn't much, just 3 empty campsites and a rusted fire pit, but it was enough. I parked beside the fire ring, cracked the windows, and leaned back in the seat to nap. I don't know how long I slept before the sound woke me. It was faint at first, like a dragging noise. Something moving slowly over gravel. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The night outside was completely still except for that sound. Soft, steady scraping like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and shone it through the windshield. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. I told myself it was probably a raccoon dragging away trash or a deer. But then I realized I was the only person there. No other cars, no tents, nothing for an animal to rummage through. The sound stopped. Silence swallowed everything. Even the crickets had gone quiet. I waited, gripping the flashlight until my knuckles went white. Then, clear as day, something tapped on the passenger side window. Once, twice, slow, deliberate. My stomach dropped. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it toward the sound. The window was fogged slightly from my breath, but I could see the faint outline of a handprint pressed against the glass. Long fingers. Too long. I froze, terrified to move or even breathe. Then the hand slid downward, dragging slowly down the window until it disappeared. That's when I made my first mistake. I got out of the car. The cold hit me immediately. The air smelled damp and metallic. I swung the flashlight beam around, expecting to catch someone crouching by the car. Nothing. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding small and stupid in the empty night. Is someone there? The beam caught the trees, tall, dense pines with branches that seemed to lean closer the longer I stared at them. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. Then from somewhere just beyond the circle of light, I heard it again. That dragging noise, only this time it was moving toward me. I stepped back instinctively until I hit the car door. The noise stopped. For a full 30 seconds I stood there in silence, my light fixed on the dark. Then, somewhere between the trees, I caught a flicker of movement, a shape slipping behind a trunk. Something tall, thin, wrong. I jumped into the car, slammed the doors, and locked them. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and headlights. I didn't sleep. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching the tree line until the sun finally broke over the horizon. By daylight, the campground looked harmless. Peaceful, even. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no sign of anything except a few scattered pine needles on the hood of my car. I laughed it off. Told myself it was exhaustion, a half-dream born of stress and bad lighting. I wish I'd left then. Instead, I decided to stay one more night. A stupid choice, I know, but daylight has a way of making fear feel foolish. I set up my small tent beside the car, built a fire, and made some coffee on my little camping stove. The forest was quiet but not dead. Birds chattered in the distance, and a woodpecker knocked against a tree somewhere behind me. Everything felt normal again. By sunset, I'd almost convinced myself that nothing strange had happened at all. The fire burned bright and warm as the light faded. I sat beside it, listening to the crackle and hiss of the wood. The shadows danced on the trees, long and twisting. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how maybe I'd needed this break more than I realized. Then I heard the whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind threading through the trees. But it came again, soft, low, like someone talking just beyond the edge of the light. I froze. The voice was faint but close. It wasn't words at first, just a sound. Then slowly I began to make out a rhythm. A whisper repeating the same few words. Over here. I whipped my head toward the sound, flashlight in hand. Nothing but trees and fog. My pulse hammered in my ears. Over here. It came again from the opposite side this time. I stood, my legs shaking, scanning the forest. The whisper was coming from every direction now, low, urgent, repeating the same thing. Over here, over here, over here. Then I heard a snap. A branch breaking. Something big was moving through the trees. The whispers stopped. And for the first time I realized I wasn't hearing one voice. I was hearing several. Maybe 3 or 4. All whispering the same words, slightly out of sync, circling closer. I stumbled backward toward the fire. My flashlight flickered, then died. In the glow of the flames, I saw it, just for a moment. A shape standing between the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the lower branches. Its arms hung too long, hands almost touching the ground. I couldn't see its face, only the pale shimmer of its skin and the way it seemed to breathe, like its whole body expanded and contracted with each sound. Then the voices came again, all at once. Over here. I grabbed my camera, it was still hanging from my neck, and snapped a photo purely out of reflex. The flash burst across the trees, blinding me for a second. When my eyes adjusted, the thing was gone. I didn't pack up. I didn't even grab my bag. I just ran. I sprinted down the dirt road, branches whipping my face, lungs burning, not daring to look back. The whispers followed me for what felt like forever. Then just as I saw the glint of my car's windshield ahead, everything went silent. I reached the car, yanked open the door, and floored it. Gravel sprayed behind me as I sped out of the forest and back onto the main road. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next town, some tiny place with a diner and a single gas pump. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there shaking, trying to catch my breath. When I finally calmed down enough to check my camera, my stomach dropped. The photo I'd taken was there, clear as day. The trees, the edge of the firelight, and something standing just beyond it. It wasn't tall in the picture. Not at all. It was right behind me. You could see my own shadow in the firelight stretched long across the dirt, and behind it, crouched low, was a pale shape with a face that looked almost human, but not quite. The mouth was open, far too wide, like it had been split from ear to ear, and even through the grain of the image I could see it was smiling. That night, I checked into a motel. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. I started hearing something again. The same dragging noise I'd heard that first night. It was faint, coming from outside the room. I looked through the blinds. There, in the dim parking lot light, I saw footprints. Wet, muddy, leading straight from the tree line to my door. They stopped right at the welcome mat, and pressed into the glass halfway up the door was another handprint. Long fingers. Too long. I called the police. They came, looked around, found nothing. Said it was probably a prank or animal tracks. But before they left, one of the officers, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, pulled me aside. "You were at Bear Creek last night?" he asked. I nodded. He stared at me for a long time before saying, "That place hasn't been open in years. We shut it down after 3 disappearances back in 2004. Locals won't go near it anymore." I didn't know what to say. Just nodded again, numb. He lowered his voice and added, "If you're smart, you'll delete that picture. Things that live out there, they don't like being seen." I moved states after that. Deleted the photo. Or at least I tried to. Every time I thought it was gone, it would show up again somewhere else, on my phone, on my laptop. Even once printed in a photo envelope I swear I never ordered. Always the same image. The fire, the trees, my shadow, and that thing behind me smiling. A few weeks ago I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was dark, silent. My phone screen was glowing on the nightstand. There was a new photo in my gallery. Taken just minutes before, it was my bed, my back. Me, sleeping. And behind me, lit faintly by the screen's reflection, something crouched low beside the mattress. Long fingers reaching out, that same split, endless grin.